Alright guys, what is going on? Hope everybody's out there staying high speed and motivated and accomplishing their goals, whatever they may be. Unfortunately today I don't have the best news to share with y'all, but I figured it was really important news and news that I need to get out to you as soon as possible so that you don't go out there and buy yourself a new Dodge Charger before you know how much money you're actually going to be making next year. I recently made another video about a month ago where I talked about how the House Armed Services Committee had drafted up their version of the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, and inside it they talked about granting a 19.5% pay raise to military grades E1 to E4. And they also talked about giving a pretty decent pay bump to E5s. At the time, I thought that that motion had pretty good potential to move forward, although we still needed to wait to see what the Senate had to say with their version of the NDAA. Were they going to bless off on 19.5% pay raise? That's kind of what we were waiting on. Unfortunately, it looks like we're seeing some pretty big kickback on that number from the Senate. All right, they are definitely not for a 19.5% pay hike for junior enlisted. Although with their version of the NDAA, it is easy to recognize that they see that the gap between junior enlisted and the senior enlisted does need to be filled a little closer, but their proposal to fill that gap is far less than what the House had proposed. So let's dive into this article that just came out today from military.com. It's the Army's birthday today, by the way, June 14th. Let's dive into this article real quick and let's see what's going on. 5.5% versus 19.5% pay raise. Senate diverges from House on how much to boost junior enlisted paychecks. That's a pretty significant difference, 5.5% versus 19.5%, right? Junior troops would see a 5.5% pay bump under a Senate plan unveiled Wednesday, setting up a clash with a House proposal to give enlisted members a significantly larger salary boost. Under the Senate Armed Services Committee's draft of the annual defense policy bill, service members of all ranks would get a 4.5% pay raise next year. Troops in the pay grades of E1 through E3 would get an extra 1% on top of that, for a total 5.5% raise. So under the Senate's proposal, they're not even considering an additional raise for E4s and definitely not for E5s. They're only giving a 1% pay raise difference for E1 to E3. So they see that there is a gap that needs to be filled, but they're really not filling it with much. And the reason for this is that the budget cap for defense spending has already been set, and what the Senate is saying, as well as the White House, which I'll get into here in a second, what the Senate is saying is that if they were to give that 19.5% pay raise to E1 to E4, it would drastically break the ceiling of that pay cap that has already been approved for the following year. And so what it looks like the House is trying to do is they're trying to force a break in that pay gap through the NDAA, while the Senate has recognized that the cap is already set in place and they see that there is a need to get more money in the pockets of junior enlisted troops, but they don't think busting through that cap is the right way to go. Now, I didn't look at the House version of the NDAA. I didn't dive into it. I'm really just taking the news at face value on this. But apparently, it looks like the House was trying to find money from other places, money that's going to current military programs now so that they could fund the additional raises for the junior enlisted. But that's sparking controversy because, well, let me just tell you what they're about, okay? Here, in fact, I'm just going to read it out verbatim so that I don't get it wrong. The efforts to boost service members' well-being still have bipartisan support, but House Democrats turned against their chamber's NDAA as a whole after Republicans approved what the Democrats call poison pill amendments during this week's floor debate on the bill. Okay, what are these poison pill amendments all about? What are they talking about? The adoption of poison pill amendments attacking reproductive health care, women, LGBTQ plus individuals, and people of color undermines the purpose of the defense bill by demeaning service members and degrading our national defense. All right, so now we're getting into some pretty sensitive topics here, but I'm just going to read you what this article says, and I think it's going to make sense how they were able to arrive to that 19.5% and where they were trying to get the additional funds from. I think they were trying to take the money from these programs. Now let's talk about what these programs are specifically. Among the amendments Republicans approved this week was one that would reverse the Pentagon's year-old policy of covering leave and travel for service members seeking abortions. Also approved was a pair of amendments to bar the Pentagon from covering gender affirmation health care for transgender troops and their dependents. Republicans also targeted diversity initiatives in the military by passing amendments that would eliminate any military diversity office and fire any staff in them, institute a permanent hiring freeze on diversity-related jobs, and cut the Pentagon job of Chief Diversity Officer. The anti-abortion access, anti-LGBTQ+, and anti-diversity amendments were all also approved by the House last year when it considered its initial version of that year's NDAA. But after negotiations with the Democrat-controlled Senate, the most controversial measures were scrapped from the final bill that became law. With the Senate and White House still controlled by Democrats, a similar outcome is expected this year. The most divisive House amendments, including on abortion, were not included in the bill advanced by the Senate Armed Services Committee this week. So I'm pretty sure I'm reading all this correctly. I will drop links to these articles in the description so you can check it out yourself in case I do get something wrong. Don't think I am, though. But what I'm reading is that the House version of the NDAA, while it did include a substantial pay bump proposal for junior enlisted troops, it also took away a lot of these programs that we've had for the last year or so. I think they understood that there was a budget cap problem with that monetary proposal with the 19.5%, but they were going to try to make it up by removing these other programs that we just talked about. Meanwhile, the Senate and the White House is just not having that. But they do recognize there is a gap that has to be made up for it with junior enlisted troops. So that's where that extra 1% on top of that 4.5% comes from. So they're still thinking about it. It's just nowhere near as much as the House proposal. So I want to bring one more thing to your attention on this topic because this statement specifically seems to be driving a lot of controversy, and I just want you to be made aware of where it's coming from. All right, so when we're talking about breaking that budget ceiling and talking about spending all the additional money and how much it would cost actually to implement such a high pay raise for the junior enlisted, this was the White House's response to that. The White House said Tuesday that it strongly opposes making a significant permanent change to the basic pay schedule before the end of its own military compensation review, which is expected to complete by the end of the year or early next year. The White House also cited cost concerns with the House's proposal. A Congressional Budget Office analysis released Monday estimated the increase in pay for junior enlisted troops will cost $24.4 billion from 2025 to 2029. Essentially, they said, look, it's just going to cost far too much to pay the troops more. That's what they're saying there. But I don't know. I know $24.4 billion is a lot of money, but that's throughout the span of 4 years, okay? I think we spend a lot more on other things, right? Go ahead and drop your thoughts on that in the comments. What do you think we're wasting our money on? Do you think that money would be better spent elsewhere, like maybe for our junior enlisted soldiers? So here's an example in the article even. So Senator Roger Wicker has said he plans to propose adding $55 billion to the defense budget during the committee's debate, though he has focused on the defense industrial base and military hardware over personnel funding. And that's typical, right? We usually spend more money on the gear, on the equipment, on the missiles and the rockets and all these things before we really think about like the troops. I think that's a big problem. What do you guys think? I think it's kind of ridiculous at this point in this day and age that we are still seeing soldiers that are using, government benefits, government assistance like SNAP and WIC and all those things. I growing up in the military myself with my family, and my wife will tell you, we had to use WIC for a lot of things, and I was constantly in debt. We were constantly in debt growing up in the military. Luckily today, 17 plus years in the Army, I am not in debt anymore, but it was really hard for definitely the first 5 years, and really it wasn't until like 10 years in that we started to really balance everything out and get out of debt. And that was not without government assistance, okay? I have definitely had government assistance in my life, guys. And that was the only way because of the amount that we got paid, right? The amount that I was getting paid as a soldier back then, that we were going to be able to take care of our family. No ifs, ands, or buts. I was constantly digging a hole out of debt, and that was even with government benefits, and we weren't just eating out every night. We weren't bad with our money. We were just barely scraping by, and that was just a reality of it. And I know for a fact that there are soldiers out there that are feeling the same effects as I felt back then, especially with how bad inflation is nowadays. It's not getting any better. So I don't know, guys. Obviously, there's a pretty significant impasse here. I'm sorry if I got your hopes up on the last video. I definitely thought that this proposed 19.5% pay hike was going to gain more traction, but unfortunately it looks like it's just not. I mean, I think no matter what, we will see some sort of pay raise for the junior enlisted, because they, the House and the Senate both seem to agree on that. But I'm not sure 1% on top of the 4.5% is going to be enough. In fact, I know that's not going to be enough. So hopefully the 19.5 is so high that it might provide some wiggle room in the middle with some negotiating, and hopefully that 1% pay hike that we're seeing from the Senate gets raised a little higher, and we can get a little more money for the junior enlisted for their pay. But it does seem like we can definitely count on a 4.5% pay increase next year, okay, because that's agreed upon between the Senate, the House, and the White House, so that's good. Now we just gotta keep fighting to close the gap for those junior enlisted, because I know you guys out there are not getting paid enough with those pay scales. I just know, and it's not going to do anything for recruitment and retention. It's just going to make it worse, because like I said in my other video, there are, and no offense when I say this, it's just fact, there are Walmart greeters that are making more money than military personnel. And it's just not right. It just isn't. The roles and responsibilities of a Walmart greeter are far less demanding than any basic service member out there. Don't care what branch you're serving in, you're most likely doing a job that's harder than a Walmart greeter. And I don't mean to offend the Walmart greeters out there. I just don't think that the service members of the United States should be getting paid the same as that job, or less for that matter. But yeah, guys, so there's the news. I'm sorry that it's not very good news this time. I really did think it was important to bring that to your attention as soon as possible, especially since I promised to do so on the last video. And again, I don't want you out there buying yourself new cars because you think you're getting a 19.5 pay raise next year. Let's just keep crossing our fingers and hoping for the best on this one. It never hurts to write your congressman if that's something that you're apt to do. Just make sure you're very professional about it, okay? But that's something that you can totally do. I, for one, am on your side. I'm really hoping for the best, and I really do think that the junior enlisted are deserving of a lot more than they're getting paid currently. I'm all for the 19.5% pay hike. I think that'd be awesome. But we're just going to have to wait and see. I promise to keep up with this news for you guys, and I promise to push out all the details as soon as I get them. Don't forget, the articles are located in the description, so you can go check them out yourself. Definitely recommend that you do so, just to make sure that I got everything right and that so you have the knowledge for yourself. Make sure to share this with your buddies so that they have the news as well. It's important that everybody knows this news. If you guys have any other comments, questions, or concerns of your own, please don't hesitate to drop that into the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And besides that, I will see you on the next one.